all of that, the test, the trial, the disliked affair that occurs, then a servant understands that it has only occurred by the decree of Allah. Allah tests His servants, and if they are able to be patient during those tests, then that is a means of elevating their status. فَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَيَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. That perhaps you hate something, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts much goodness into that affair.
وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So last week then we started this first section, which is about the decree. أن يؤمن الرجل بالقدر خيره وشره حلوه ومره. That a man believes in the decree, it's good and it's bad, it's sweet and it's bitter. And we discussed the opening section regarding that. After that, Al-Imaam Al-Humaydi mentioned وأن يعلم أن ما أصابه لم يكن ليخطئه وما أخطأه لم يكن ليصيبه وأن ذلك كله قضاء من الله عز وجل وفي نسخة فضل من الله عز وجل. That a person understands and recognizes that everything that occurs to him, it was never going to miss him. And anything that misses him, then it was never going to occur to him. And that all of that is from the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this section here, it now talks about the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and about what occurs, what does not occur, and how a person should consider and think about those affairs. يقرر هنا ما تقدم بيانه من أن العبد المؤمن الذي رضي بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم نبيا ورسولا, that just as it was mentioned before in the earlier section regarding the decree, that a believer, a servant, must have contentment with the decree of Allah and be satisfied and content with Allah as His Lord and with Islam as His religion and with Muhammad as His messenger. وأن يعلم علما يقينيا لا شك فيه ولا مرية أن ما أصابه من مكروه أو ابتلاء أو نحو ذلك لم يكن ليخطئه. And that a servant knows and understands with absolute certainty, without a shadow of a doubt in it, that whatever has occurred to him from evil or from some affair that is disliked, some trial, whatever has occurred, then it was never going to miss him. All of that إنما أمر قد قدره الله جل وعلا عليه وكتبه عليه. All of that, the test, the trial, the disliked affair that occurs, then a servant understands that it has only occurred by the decree of Allah and that it was never going to miss him. وَأَنَّ مَا أَخْطَأَهُ لَمْ يَكُنْ لِيُصِيبَهُ. And the other way around as well. Whatever misses him, whatever doesn't happen for him, then it was not going to happen for him. كُلُّ ذَلِكَ وَاقِعٌ بِقَضَاءِ اللَّهِ وَقَدَرِهِ. All of that, it occurs by the decree of Allah. What happens, what doesn't happen, all of it is by the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so a person needs to constantly remember that everything is in the decree of Allah. فَإِنْ أَيْقَنَ الْعَبْدُ بِهَذَا اطْمَأَنَّ قَلْبُهُ وَانْشَرَحَ صَدْرُهُ. So when a servant is absolutely certain about that, has absolute iman in that, then no matter what happens, his heart will be at ease. His heart will be comfortable, at ease, knowing that whatever has happened or hasn't happened, then it was all by the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Allah mentioned in the Quran, فَمَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ أَنْ يَهْدِيَهُ يَشْرَحْ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ وَمَنْ يُرِدْ أَنْ يُضِلَّهُ يَجْعَلْ صَدْرَهُ ضَيِّقًا حَرَجًا كَأَنَّمَا يَصَّعَّدُ فِي السَّمَاءِ. That whomsoever Allah wants to guide, then Allah opens up his heart to Islam, and whomsoever Allah wishes to misguide, then his heart is made tight and restricted and constrained, and not with a feeling of comfort or ease, but tightened up. فهذه المعرفة تورث عند العبد أن ما وقع عليه مما أصابه أو مما أخطأه مما لم يصبه كله بقضاء الله عز وجل. So, if a servant understands that properly and has absolute unwavering belief in that, iman with certainty in that, then he will always be at ease and comfort, knowing whatever has happened to him has happened by the decree of Allah, and whatever didn't happen, then it didn't happen by the decree of Allah. فَلَا يَقَعُ فِي مُلْكِهِ جَلَّ وَعَلَى مَا لَا يُرِيدُ. Because nothing occurs in the creation of Allah that Allah does not will. If Allah doesn't will it, then it would not occur. So anything that occurs is by the will of Allah. فَاللَّهُ جَلَّ وَعَلَى يَعْلَمُ مَا كَانَ وَمَا يَكُونُ وَمَا لَمْ يَكُنْ لَوْ كَانَ كَيْفَ يَكُونُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what has occurred in the past and what will occur in the future. And even those things that never occurred, if they had occurred, then Allah knows how they would have occurred, how they would have happened. Things that never even happened. Allah knows how they would have happened if they had happened. So not only does Allah know the past and the present and the future, but even the possibilities that never occurred, if they had occurred, Allah knows how they would have occurred and what would have happened too. يقول جل وعز in one of the ayat as an example and a proof for that, إن الله لا يخفى عليه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء. that indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nothing is concealed from Him in the earth or in the heavens. Nothing is concealed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala whatsoever. فهذه المعاني العظيمة تورث عند العبد انكسارا وخشية واطمئنانا وذلا وخضوعا لله جل وعلا وإيمانا وتسليما له. So understanding all of these things, understanding that whatever Allah wills, then it occurs, and whatever Allah does not will, then it does not occur. Understanding all of that, then it brings about, it produces an element of submission and humility within the servant. It brings about that humility in the servant, and it brings about comfort and ease within the servant, knowing that whatever occurs only by the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he has absolute iman in that, and he submits to that. بأنما أصابه هو بقضاء الله فالأمر إليه. So whatever has happened, he knows it is by the decree of Allah, and the affair returns back to him. وَالشَّرُّ لَيْسَ إِلَيْهِ. And evil is not attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That in brief about evil not being attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person may say, but there are things in this dunya that are evil, things in this world that we view as evil, scorpions and poisonous snakes and these things, we view them as evil, and other affairs of the dunya that we view as evil. However, that evil is not attributed to Allah. Even though we're saying nothing occurs except by the will of Allah, but that evil is not attributed to Allah. Meaning, in brief, from our perspective, from how we perceive and understand things in this world, from our perspective, we perceive things to be evil. Yet from the perspective, from looking at it from the angle of Allah having created that, from Allah having created these things, then everything was created and done upon wisdom. Like for example, sins. Why a person may say, we commit sins. Allah willed that sins occur, and so they occur. That's evil. So a person may think about sins and that they are evil. And of course they are evil, but we do not attribute evil to Allah. Ibn al-Qayyim mentioned, from our perspective, of course, we recognize sins to be evil. But from Allah having willed those sins and allowed them to occur in the creational will, then there are benefits and there are wisdoms. For example, Ibn al-Qayyim said, when a person commits a sin and then he recognizes the error he's fallen into, and so he seeks forgiveness and repents, then after that, after having gone through that process of having fallen into a sin, but then recognized his error and repented and sought forgiveness from Allah, then he comes out at the other end, perhaps in a better state, in a stronger state, firm that he's not going to go back to sins again. Maybe he comes out in a firmer position, knowing the error he made, recognizing the error he made and how he felt in that error and what he did, And so now maybe he comes out with iman and strength. He's not going to go back to those affairs again. So the sin is of course evil, but now the consequence of where this person is now, maybe he's in a good position now. So there can be aspects to things that we do not perceive. And the Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, though, has done everything upon wisdom. And so that's the basic meaning of how evil is not attributed to Allah. Then it mentions here, and remember again just briefly, there are two types of the will of Allah, so that there is no confusion about these things. There are two types of the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala: al-irada al-kawniyya and al-irada al-shar'iyya. One is the will of Allah in the creational sense, al-irada al-kawniyya, and one is the will of Allah in the legislative sense, al-irada al-shar'iyya. There is a difference between these two wills of Allah. One of them, the first one, al-irada al-kawniyya, the will of Allah in the creational sense. Whatever Allah wills there absolutely occurs. And whatever Allah does not will there absolutely does not occur. The will of Allah in the creation, whatever Allah wills, it occurs. And whatever Allah does not will, it does not occur. Then there is another type of will, which is the legislative will of Allah, al-irada al-shar'iyya. And that is connected to what Allah loves. So Allah loves that everybody should be upon Tawheed. It is loved, beloved to Allah that everybody should be upon Tawheed. In the legislative sense, that is what Allah loves. But in the creational sense, does Allah will that for every single person? No. So in the creational sense, Allah allows certain things to occur. Allah wills certain things to occur as tests and trials. But that doesn't mean Allah willed certain people are going to be kuffar. Does it mean Allah loves kufr? No, because that is just the creational will of Allah. Allah allows those things to occur as tests and trials. What Allah loves is known as the legislative will of Allah. What Allah loves, and that may not always be decreed by Allah in the creational sense. So Allah loves Iman and Tawheed. Allah hates and does not love Kufr and Shirk. But in the creational sense, Allah decrees certain things as tests and trials upon the people. So you have to understand those two things. There is no confusion that if Allah allows or wills kufr or bid'ah and these things to occur, then how could Allah allow that? Does Allah love that? Of course not. This is a creational will where Allah allows these affairs and they are tests and trials upon the people. And then there is the legislative will of Allah, what Allah loves. And the scholars, they talk about that. Maybe we mentioned it here in this class previously. What is an example of both of those wills of Allah being in effect? Where Allah loves something and Allah has decreed it in the creational sense. They say, for example, the Iman of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu died as a Muslim. So in the creational sense, had Allah decreed that to occur? Absolutely, wouldn't have happened otherwise. Allah decreed Abu Bakr as-Siddiq would be a believer and die as a believer. Does Allah love that? love that Abu Bakr should have been upon Iman and should have died upon Iman? Absolutely. So the legislative will of Allah is there, and the creational will of Allah was there in the fact of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq being a believer and dying as a believer. Both wills were there. Then they give another example and they say Abu Jahl or Abu Lahab died as a disbeliever. Did Allah will that in the creational sense? Absolutely. If Allah didn't, He wouldn't have died as a disbeliever. Allah willed it in the creational sense. Did Allah will it in the legislative sense? No, because Allah does not love kufr. So that is an example. The fact that a kafir dies as a kafir is an example of where Allah does not love that. There is no legislative will upon that. But there is the creational sense. That will of Allah, al-irada al-kawniyya, is there. Allah decreed that in that sense. Another example, Abu Lahab dying as a Muslim. Abu Lahab dying as a Muslim. Did Allah decree that in the creational sense? No, because we know he died as a kafir. So that was not decreed in the creational sense, him dying as a believer. Legislatively, is that something Allah loves though? Absolutely. Allah loves that the disbelievers should accept Tawheed and die as believers. Legislatively, Allah loves that, but creationally, as it was the case with him and his heart, it was decreed he died upon kufr. So there's an example of al-irada ash-shar'iyya being there, but not al-irada al-kawniyya of Allah for that to occur. A Muslim, for example, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq dying as a non-Muslim. Did Allah decree that in al-irada al-kawniyya, in the creational sense? Absolutely not. We know Abu Bakr died as a Muslim. Would Allah love that in the legislative sense? So that's an example of where neither of the will of Allah was effective there. Because Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was not decreed creationally to die as a kafir, died as a believer, from the best of the believers, the strongest of Iman. And neither would that be something beloved to Allah for a believer to die as a non-believer. So there are four combinations there. Four combinations between the two types of the will of Allah. The will of Allah in the creational sense and the will of Allah in the legislation, what Allah loves. Abu Bakr dying as a Muslim, decreed, he did. And Allah loves that. Both of those wills were present in that scenario. Abu Bakr dying as a non-Muslim. Allah did not will that, neither would Allah love that. An example, hypothetically, of where neither of those wills of Allah would be present. Abu Lahab dying as a non-Muslim. Creationally, the will was there for that to occur. Legislatively, no. Abu Lahab dying as a Muslim. Creationally, that will was not there, but in this case, legislatively, it would be there. Four combinations in total. Think about that again afterwards. It becomes clear the four combinations in regards to the two types of the will of Allah. So when we talk about sins and these affairs, they are not from the legislative will of Allah. Allah doesn't love those things. But in the creational sense, Allah allows and decrees those things as tests and trials. Then Shaykh Abdullah al-Bukhari mentions in this next section regarding the statement وَأَنَّ ذَلِكَ كُلَّهُ فَضْلٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ وَأَنَّ ذَلِكَ كُلَّهُ قَضَاءٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. So there are these two versions in this section. One section says that all of that is by the virtue and favor of Allah. And another version says all of that is by the decree of Allah. In reality, both of those mean the same thing. عند التأمل لا نجد فرقا في المعنى والدلالة. فإن العبد إذا أيقن وتيقن وآمن وسلم واستسلم لله عز وجل بما سبق تقريره علم أن ما أصابه هو فضل حتى لو كان ابتلاء وامتحانا واختبارا فهو رفعة ابتلاء رفعة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا. So when a servant thinks about this and he has that absolute certainty and has that absolute belief and submits to the decree of Allah, then he knows whatever happens to him, whatever happens, good or bad, it is all by the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even if something bad happens to him, he recognizes this is a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And going through a test and being patient upon it is a means of elevating the status of that servant. Allah tests His servants, and if they are able to be patient during those tests, then that is a means of elevating their status. It's a means of elevating their rank. Allah raises them for passing those tests, for remaining patient in those difficulties and trials. As Allah said in the Quran, لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا, that He tests you. Allah gave us life and death to test us. Which of you will be the best in your actions? فإذا ما علم أن ذلك هو قضاء الله علم أن ذلك من فضل الله عليه. So if you recognize that all the affairs, even the difficulties and tests, are from the decree of Allah, then you also recognize thereafter that this is all from the virtue of Allah and the favor of Allah upon you. Even if it's a difficulty and a test, you recognize it's the favor of Allah upon you, because you are being given an opportunity to raise your rank and to elevate your standing through that test and patience within it. So you recognize all of the decree, it is a favor and a virtue of Allah upon you. As Allah said, وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَشْكُرُونَ. But however, many of the people, they are not grateful. Because many of the people, when they are tested with tests and trials, they don't recognize these affairs regarding the decree. And they think, as the ignorant ones think, why me, and why did this happen to me, and what did I do, and I don't deserve this. That is how people think, and that is why they become upset and they become depressed and they lose hope and they fall into all types of affairs that are impermissible, because they forget to recognize these great affairs of our iman in the decree of Allah, and that a test and a trial, be patient in it, and it can be a means for elevating the rank and the station of that servant of Allah. وإذا ما تقرر هذا الاعتقاد وتشربه القلب وخالط هذا الاعتقاد السني الصحيح بشاشة القلب والله يستقر ويطمئن ويسلم وينشرح صدره اطمئنانا وتسليما. Shaykh Abdullah al-Bukhari says, if you truly then understand this aqeedah regarding the decree, and your heart absorbs all of this aqeedah, your heart is filled with this understanding and certainty regarding the decree of Allah, and so you have that happiness in your heart and comfort in your heart, and you will submit to the decree of Allah, and you will find so much ease, so much comfort in of yourself. But the one who doesn't recognize these affairs, he is the one who does not find any ease and comfort at those times of difficulty. As Allah said in the Quran, فَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَيَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. That perhaps you hate something, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts much goodness into that affair. You may hate something thinking this is only bad, but you do not know what the future holds. Perhaps there is something good from that occurs, and great goodness Allah may place into that, and you are unaware. فالعابد المؤمن لا يدري ما الخير الذي سيدركه ويلحقه. The believer doesn't know what goodness may come to you, what goodness may be on its way to you, what goodness you may end up achieving. You don't know where and what the future holds and what is coming. لأن النظرة والرؤية فيها قصور, because our foresight, our vision, what we see and perceive is very limited. We only see what's in front of us. Look what's going on, what's happening, and we don't have that long vision and sight. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. فَمَا يُصِيبُهُ ظَاهِرُهُ ضُرٌّ وَبَاطِنُهُ رَحْمَةٌ لَوْ تَأَمَّلْ. So it could be that something occurring to you, it appears to be evil and harmful, but within that, perhaps there is some goodness you have not understood and seen yet. ذكر الإمام ابن القيم رحمه الله في الوابل الصيب في تقدمته أن العبد المؤمن يتقلب في ثلاثة أطباق. Ibn al-Qayyim said that a servant is always revolving around one of three states. You are always in one of three states. طبق الذنوب, either you are in the state of sinning. طبق الابتلاء, or you are in the state of being tested and tried. طبق النعم, or you are in the state of being given blessings. You're always going to be in one of those three states: sinning, trials and tribulations, or blessings. So as for the first state, if you are in the state of sinning, يجب عليه فيه الاستغفار. What is upon you if you find yourself in that state is to seek forgiveness. To seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالطَّبَقُ الثَّانِي, and if you find yourself in the second state of tests and trials, then what is obligated upon you in that state is patience, sabr. And if you find yourself in the third state of blessings, then upon you is shukr, gratefulness and gratitude and thankfulness to Allah. ثم قال, then Ibn al-Qayyim said, فنسأل الله جل وعلا أن يجعلنا ممن إذا أذنب استغفر وإذا أنعم عليه شكر وإذا ابتلي صبر. That we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who, when they sin, they seek forgiveness. They hasten to seek forgiveness. And when they are blessed, they are thankful and grateful to Allah. And when they are tested and tried, they are patient. Ibn al-Qayyim mentioned that in Al-Wabil-Sunnah. That is also very famous because Shaykh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab opened up one of his famous books with exactly that point. The book, which one? If a servant sins, then he seeks forgiveness. If he's tried, he's patient. If he's blessed, he thanks Allah. Where is that mentioned? The four principles. Al-Qawa'id al-Arba', right at the beginning of the four principles, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, rahimahullah ta'ala, Shaykh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, he mentions that. And Ibn al-Qayyim had mentioned that also earlier, centuries earlier in Al-Wabil-Sunnah. ثم تكلم, then Ibn al-Qayyim تكلم رحمه الله عن الصبر وأركانه. Ibn al-Qayyim then talked about patience and its pillars. وقال كلمة عظيمة تكتب بماء العينين. And Ibn al-Qayyim said a tremendous statement that is to be written with, as Shaykh Abdullah al-Bukhari says, with the water of your eyes. What does that mean? With your tears? But what does it mean? Why would you write something? Why would you use your water from your eyes as the ink?
Remorse. Having remorse.
Remorse. Usually, what's the phrase that people use? This is to be written in gold. Usually, that's the phrase. It is to be written in gold. But Shaykh Abdullah al-Bukhari, hafidhahullah ta'ala, often uses this phrase instead. We used to hear this a lot from him. It is to be written with the water of your eyes. What does that mean? Is
Staying alive.
staying alive, what do you mean?
Because there's no water, then you are dead.
Basically, what is more valuable to you? A bar of gold or a room full of gold even? Or the water of your eyes? If the water of your eyes goes, your eyes dry out, you become blind, etc., what would you value more? The bar of gold or the room full of gold even? Or for example, your eyesight? Your eyesight, nobody would take the room full of gold if it was at the expense of taking your eyes out. That's what it means. Write this with the water of your eyes, because that is even more valuable than gold, showing the level of importance of this statement. That's how important it is. Write it with the water of your eyes. وأنا أذكر معنى كلامه رحمه الله ليس نصه وهو ليس ببعيد. So Shaykh Abdullah al-Bukhari says, I'll tell you now generally what Ibn al-Qayyim said, not the exact words. He said generally, and it's very close to what he said. قال رحمه الله بعد أن تكلم عن الصبر وأركانه من حبس اللسان عن التسخط والجوارح عن اللطم وشق الجيوب والشكاية والقلب عن الجزع. After Ibn al-Qayyim was talking about patience and the pillars of patience and controlling your tongue, not letting your tongue loose at the time of difficulty and saying all types of things, and controlling your limbs, not doing things and tearing your clothes and beating yourself, controlling yourself and not complaining and not allowing your heart to fall into depression, etc. After Ibn al-Qayyim mentioned those or was talking about those things, he said, إن الله ليبتلي عبده المؤمن لا ليهلكه ولكن ليمتحن صبره وعبوديته. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not test his believing servant, does not put trial and tribulation upon him in order to destroy him. Allah does not test and try His servants to destroy them. Rather, Allah tests and tries His servants to test their patience and to test their level of worship of Allah. فإن لله على العبد عبودية في السراء كما له عبادة في الضراء. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a right upon His servants to be worshipped at times of difficulty or at times of happiness, just like at the times of difficulty too. It's not that a person only worships Allah when he's relaxing, but when difficulty comes he forgets, or the other way around. Rather, the servant has a right upon him to worship Allah in times of ease and in times of difficulty and hardship and harm. وَلَهُ عِبَادَةٌ فِيمَا يُحِبُّهُ الْمَرْءُ وَلَهُ عِبَادَةٌ فِيمَا يَكْرَهُ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the right to be worshipped in matters that are beloved to the servant. There may be certain things that are beloved to you, and they are acts of worship, and you love them as well. There may be things that are not beloved to you. They are difficult or they are hard, but they are worships that need to be done. So worship could be in affairs that you love, and it could be in affairs that are difficult and you don't love as other things. وغالب الناس تعطي العبودية فيما تحب والشأن كل الشأن إعطاء العبودية في المكاره. Majority of people, they will of course engage in worship in that which is easy and beloved to them. But when it is in times of difficulty and hardship, that's when the real test is. Not when it's something easy and beloved to you anyway, and the circumstances are beloved to you anyway. The real test, asha'nu kulla sha'n. The reality of the test and the reality of testing that person is what he behaves like in the affairs that are disliked to him. Affairs that are disliked to him. Situations and matters that are disliked to him. Then will he be upon the worship of Allah or not? That's the real test. فهناك تفاوت رتب الناس. There is, of course, a great level of difference in the degrees of the people, in the levels of the people in their worship in these affairs. وبحسب ذلك كانت منازلهم عند الله تبارك وتعالى. And so according to how each servant behaves in those times and affairs and difficulties and matters, depending on how every servant behaves, that is your level to Allah. That is the level you are then going to be at before Allah, depending on how you behave and deal with those affairs. فعند التأمل ترى صدق هذا الكلام. So when you think about this, you recognize the truthfulness of this statement and this speech here that Ibn al-Qayyim has mentioned there. Ibn al-Qayyim finished now. Shaykh Abdullah al-Bukhari is saying, when you think about that, then you understand how true it is what Ibn al-Qayyim is saying there. من من الناس لا يحب السعة في الرزق والعافية في الجسم والراحة. Are there any people, as Shaykh Abdullah says, are there any people who don't love to have lots of wealth or provisions and sustenance and good health and comfort and ease? Who doesn't like that? Everybody loves to be in that kind of situation. Plenty of wealth and sustenance and comfort and ease. Everybody loves to be in that kind of situation. كل الناس تريد هذا. Everybody wants that. بل إن بعض الناس يظن أنه لا بد أن يكون معافى ويظن أنه لا بد أن يكون صحيحا قويما وهذا ليس شرطا. Some people, they think you have to be in good health and in strength, and that is not the condition. نعم الله سبحانه على عباده كثيرا ولكن أكثرهم كما قال تعالى وقليل من عبادي الشكور. The blessings of Allah upon the people are many. Many. Yet as Allah said in the Quran, وَقَلِيلٌ مِّنْ عِبَادِيَ الشَّكُورِ. How few from among my servants are grateful. How few are the ones who are thankful to Allah, despite all of the great blessings that are given to so many of those servants. قال سلمة بن دينار الأعرج, one of the great Imams from the time of the Salaf, Salama ibn Dinar, known as Al-A'raj, he said, كل نعمة لا تقربك من الله فهي بلية. Every blessing that does not bring you closer to Allah, then it is in reality a calamity upon you, not a blessing. Blessings that Allah gives you should bring you closer to Allah. You recognize those blessings and you are thankful to Allah for them. You increase in your worship. Blessings should increase you in your closeness to Allah. But if a blessing you are given does not, it distances you, then that blessing in reality is not a blessing for you. It's a calamity upon you. That blessing has become a calamity upon you, a test, a trial upon you. That you're getting that blessing and not being grateful to Allah for it. It's become a test and a trial upon you now. كم هي النعم علينا صباح مساء. Shaykh Abdullah al-Bukhari says, how many are the blessings upon us day and night. The number of blessings that Allah bestows upon us. Mathalan, for example, asma'. We can all hear. we have hearing, absar, we can all see, ajsad, sahiha, bodies that are in good health, we have health. Aklun wa sharab, food and drink. Ma'un wa hawa, water and air. Ni'amun la tu'ad wa la tantahi, blessings that cannot be enumerated, blessings that cannot be counted and they don't finish. كم الذين استغلوا هذه النعم التي أنعم الله بها في التقرب إليه مسارعين إلى تحقيق العبودية لله جل وعلا. How many people actually utilize these blessings that Allah has blessed them with to become closer to Allah? How many people actually use those blessings and become closer to Allah with them, seeking to fulfill the worship of Allah and be grateful and thankful? How many people actually do that? قَدْ يَبْتَلِيكَ اللَّهُ بِبَلِيَّةٍ لَا لِيُهْلِكَكَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests His servants. And sometimes you may be tested with something, a test, a trial, not to destroy you. لا ليهلكك إنما ليمتحن صبرك وإيمانك به وبقضائه وقدره. أتصبر. Rather, it may be to test your patience. To test your patience and your iman in the decree of Allah. Are you going to be patient or not? هل تشتكي الله إلى عوادك أم هو التسليم والرضا بقضاء الله وقدره مع الأخذ بالأسباب الشرعية? Are you going to, in those times of difficulty, complain, why me and I didn't deserve this and why has Allah decreed this upon me? Are you going to be like that? Or are you going to submit and accept that this is the decree of Allah, submit to that decree and take the means, take the necessary means to improve your situation, make dua to Allah and take the means for betterment? Or are you going to sit there complaining against Allah? This is the test, the trial that Allah places upon the people. فإن لله عبودية في السراء كما له عبادة في الضراء له عبودية عليك في كل حال يجب أن تحققها. And so that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is deserving of our worship in times of ease and in times of trials and calamities and difficulties. In both circumstances. One example, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لعمران بن حسين وكان يشتكي البواسير كما جاء في صحيح البخاري, that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم said to Imran ibn Hussein, when Imran ibn Hussein had a certain ailment, he had a certain issue and he wasn't able to pray properly. So the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم told him, صلي قائما, pray standing up. فإن لم تستطع فقاعدا, and if you can't, if you cannot, then sit down and pray. فإن لم تستطع فعلى جنب, and if you can't even sit down because of the pain of this ailment that you have, then lie down and pray. Giving you the answer and the solution, no matter what the difficulty is, the pain. Pray standing if you can't, pray sitting down if you cannot, pray lying down. فبين لعمران, so the Prophet ﷺ clarified to Imran ibn Hussein that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the right of worship in all circumstances. If you're too ill or you have this pain or ailment that you can't stand, no problem, sit down and pray. If you can't even do that because of this ailment, this problem, this illness, then lie down and pray. Allah has a right to worship from you in all circumstances, whatever you can manage, in whatever situation it may be. فالرضا بالله جل وعز وبقضائه يورث الإيمان العميق. So having this firm belief in the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings about a great deal of iman within the servant. وَوَاللَّهِ وَبِاللَّهِ وَتَاللَّهِ. Shaykh Abdullah al-Bukhari takes 3 oaths. Wallahi, and you can also say in Arabic, billahi, and you can also say tallahi. He says all of them. Wallahi wa billahi wa tallahi. من تأمل هذه الحقائق رق قلبه واستقام أمره. Whoever thinks about what we've been talking about here now, whoever thinks about these things carefully, your heart will be softened. Your heart will be softened, and your affair, you as an individual, you will become upright. Your heart will become softened and you will become upright upon obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وعلم أن علم الاعتقاد يقرب من الملك الجليل الديان جل وعلا ويورث خشية وانكسارا وخضوعا وذلا له جل في علاه. And when you understand this correct aqidah, then you know it will bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it will produce this submission within you and this humility within you before your Creator, before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Ibn al-Qayyim, the last thing we'll finish off on, لَعَلَّ قَائِلًا يقول, maybe somebody might say, ماذا يريد الإمام ابن القيم بقوله السابق وبحسب ذلك كانت منازلهم عند الله تبارك وتعالى, that according to your level of understanding of these affairs and how patient you are, etc., how you deal with those things, that's what your level will be before Allah. That's what your level will then be. What does that mean? كيف تتفاوت رتب الناس في ذلك? How are people going to be different levels in that? Shaykh Abdullah al-Bukhari says, هذا الأمر بينه وأوضحه الإمام نفسه رحمه الله في كتابه الفوائد. Ibn al-Qayyim himself explained that in more detail in one of his other books, Al-Fawaid, the benefits. He said, فصل حق العبودية لله سبحانه على عبده أمر أمره به وقضاء يقضيه عليه ونعمة ينعم بها عليه فلا ينفك من هذه الثلاثة. He said that the right of worshipping Allah, that is a right that is upon the servants. Allah has commanded the servants with that. And Allah has decreed that upon the servants, that they need to worship in times of difficulty and all their matters. And there are blessings that Allah bestows upon His servants. So now, the servant is therefore always revolving around those affairs. And how he behaves and deals with each of those situations will then determine his level. So these are the affairs that Allah decrees upon us, how we behave and how we interact and how we deal with those situations. That is what determines our level as a believer. That is where we'll stop on for today then. And inshallah ta'ala we'll carry on. There's a little bit more yet. Shaykh Abdullah al-Bukhari does go into a reasonable amount of detail in this section regarding the decree. So there's a bit more to go on that. Maybe one more lecture to finish this section regarding the decree. And that will actually now be then not next week, not the week after, the week after that. Because the bookings and the way it is, we don't have the whole booking the next 2 weeks. They are not able to give it to us for the next 2 weeks. Booked out or other things. So we don't have the whole the next week or the week after. So now you've got 2 weeks to revise carefully. To revise carefully what we've done so far. Go over it carefully, this opening section. This is now 3-4 lectures we've done. Look at that carefully, memorize what you need to memorize, learn it, go over it. You have the 2 weeks and then we come back, is it November 24th maybe? Sunday, November the 24th, we come back. So the next 2 Sundays are off. Then we come back I think it's the 24th it works out or something, November 24th, November 24th, insha'Allah ta'ala.